Hello everybody and welcome to the Carlam Cymru revision sessions. This session this evening will focus on ecosystems as part of the GCSE and will be presented by Mr Cobb from e-sgol Aberteifi. The session will last around 45 minutes where Mr Cobb will run through the relevant content. If you have any questions during the session, please use the question and answer section and we'll do our best to answer you. You will see that there is a hyperlink in the Q&A section. If you're happy to leave your name and email address, we would love to keep in touch with you so that we can send you information about future events. You can click on the link at any time during the session. Today's session will be recorded and the recording and any relevant resources will be uploaded to the e-sgol website under the Carlam Cymru tab. Thank you, Mr Cobb. Over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Right, okay, we're going to have a stab here at covering the ecosystems topic, and it's a large topic. There's lots going on, but let's see how we get on. We'll cover what we can. So here's the plan. Let's get straight into food webs and food chains, because that sort of forms the bedrock of this topic. Ecosystems is a topic that pupils often find tricky. The norm is that pupils prefer more of the human biology side of biology, but there's lots of really interesting aspects of ecosystems too that's worth us delving into and looking to understand to make our life easier when it comes to exam time. So food webs and chains, here's our plan to begin with. So we're going to look at organisms in a food chain and identify those, look at how food chains and webs show the transfer of energy between organisms, and then the really tricky part then is looking at how energy is used and lost in a food chain. So let's get going here with a simple with food chain. So on the, you can see on the screen there, we can see a food web, lots of food chains linked together. Now it's important to note right from the start that it's the sun that is the source of energy for all ecosystems. So this is the business end here. Now it's the sunlight here, whilst it's shown sort of on the bottom left hand corner, it's the sunlight which is the ultimate source of energy for all organisms. And that's because you'll have the likes of the plants, the likes of grass that's shown here, which get their energy from the sun. So it's clear that plants get their energy from the sun, but animals then eat plants, or animals eat animals which have eaten plants, and consequently ultimately, every organism is dependent upon the sun for energy. Now, like I just said, plants are responsible for capturing the sun's energy for photosynthesis to allow them to make food. So photosynthesis being a different topic, or the previous topic normally to ecosystems, depending upon the order in which you've covered it, but you should be familiar with photosynthesis. And there I've highlighted at the bottom this food web then, and at the start of any food chain there will be a plant there. Now some of that energy that the plant has obtained from the sun is used to make plant cells, and that's particularly useful because it is those cells which contain the energy which is passed on to any organisms which consume that plant. So you can see I've identified there four organisms, four groups if you like. You've got cattle and the sheep, the grasshoppers, the aphids, and those birds which are responsible, or responsible is the wrong word, which eat plants, and therefore they obtain their energy from the plants by eating the cells of those plants which have been made using energy from the sun. Now in a food chain, it's worth noting, so there's a number of food chains shown within this whole food web, but in this food chain here I've got grass being eaten by seed-eating birds, being eaten by birds of prey. That's a very simple food chain. This arrow that you see shows the transfer of energy between organisms. Now in year 7 or 8 you might say that the arrow shows what eats what, and that's true, but at GCSE we need to be talking at a higher level than that. So it's not uncommon to be asked the question, what does the arrow show? And the answer is that it shows the transfer of energy between organisms. And as I've mentioned now, we can link lots of food chains to form a food web, and that's what we've got on there. Now, let's see what you remember. So look, we've got, I could wait here, but actually I think it's in our interest that with all of these, I'll show you a few of these today, that this is a good opportunity for you to, if you're doing this and watching the recording, you can pause the video and you can then go and attempt these fill in the blanks. Now, as I'm here, we're doing this live, we'll get on with look at these answers, but really it's just reproducing those terms we've had already. And the reason I like to do this, and it's good for you to do this, is it just keeps you just focused on what the content is that you need to know here. So I'll just take it back to that. Having covered all that, it's very easy to be passive as a learner and just sit there and do very little. And once we sort of up the ante a little bit and put in a few of these exercises, which I'll try and do with all of my these lessons here, hopefully that will help you to just stay on top of things. So what should we have here? Well, it's the sun that is the source of energy for all organisms. It says plants capture solar energy for photosynthesis. Some of that energy is used to make plant cells, and when organisms feed on the plant's energy, this energy is passed on. And in a food chain, the arrows show the transfer of energy between organisms. And then food chains can be linked to form food webs. Now it's worth noting those terms let's just go back a moment. Those terms I've hidden: the sun, photosynthesis, plant cells, passed on, transfer of energy, and food webs. Now would be a really good idea to sort of, as you make a note of those whenever you're doing these fill in the blanks exercises, to then think, put all your other material away and just look at those individual words and see if you can put those words together in coherent sentences that explains what we've just said about food chains. If you like to reproduce the sentences you're seeing in front of you, not word for word, but just get the gist of those sentences using only those words those fill in the blanks words as waypoints. So it's a good idea to try that to make sure that you've got a good grasp of it's two reasons for it, actually. So the first reason is to improve your recall, okay, to be able to recall the information, because ultimately in an exam there are going to be facts that you need. And I deliberately, when I do fill in the blanks exercises like this, I make sure it's those key biological words that I cover. But the other reason to do this, and the other reason I say that it's a good idea just to take those words alone and use them as a starting point for explaining what we've just talked about, is that it improves your understanding. Nothing helps your understanding better than trying to explain to someone else. Now, there doesn't actually have to be anyone physical there. You can just, there's the act of thinking things through. You can explain it to a wall if you want. The act of trying to explain that, when you're not making yourself very clear, and then you can address that. Okay, let's move on. Right, so let's go on a little bit further and look at an individual food chain, okay, and let's look at some of the terms associated with a food chain. So first of all, let's start with the producer. Okay, so producer is defined as any organism which can make its own food, and we're pretty safe to just say we're talking about plants there. So plants are able to make their own food because they use photosynthesis, we talked about already. They use the energy from the sun to make glucose, and then they use that to make cells, as we talked about. Now, for that reason, you're always going to have a producer at the bottom of the food chain. So in that first position, there will always be a producer there. Now, a consumer is an organism which consumes others, and there are many different consumers. And I'm just going to look if I can. So if I can change this, anything which comes after the oak leaves or the producer is a consumer. So we have a number of consumers on here. Now, that's no good. We need to define them a little bit better. So we can have primary, secondary, or tertiary or quaternary consumers, depending on where they are in the food chain. So here we have our primary consumer, because it is the first consumer to appear in the food chain. And we're going to be a little bit careful about the word primary, because we know what primary means. It means first, doesn't it? Well, it is the first consumer, but it is not the first organism, because our first organism will always be a producer, will always be a plant. Our second organism that appears in the food chain will be our first consumer, so will be our primary consumer. Then consumed by, eaten by a secondary consumer and a tertiary consumer. Now, that's all well and good, but we just need to have a few more terms in here, terms you'll probably be familiar with. An organism which eats only plants is referred to as a herbivore. So in this case, the slug, primary consumer, is a herbivore. I think it's fair to say all primary consumers will be herbivores. Organism which eats only animals is called a carnivore. Now it's identified here that the thrush and the sparrowhawk are carnivores. Now, just because they're secondary consumers in a food chain, it doesn't necessarily mean they're a carnivore. They could eat plants and animals, but certainly based upon the information we have in front of us, we would have to say that a thrush is a carnivore and a sparrowhawk is a carnivore, because based upon what we're seeing in front of us, they are eating animals. Okay, let's see if we can do the same here. Can you identify what words are missing from there? I'll just give you 30 seconds to have a little go on that. Right. Okay, let's see what we've got here. So consumers may be primary, secondary, tertiary, etc., depending on where they are in the food chain. Producer will always be at the bottom of the food chain. An organism which eats only plants is called a herbivore. A producer is an organism which can make its own food. An organism which eats only animals is called a carnivore. And a consumer is an organism which eats other organisms. Now you'll notice I've changed the order. If I take that back a little bit, the order in which those sentences appears is different to the order which appears on there. What that does is it just ups that level of difficulty, because you were used to seeing, by changing the order, it just makes it a little bit more difficult. And always, whenever you're revising, whenever you're studying, there needs to be a level of challenge in order for it to stay with you, to stick with you, to make it more memorable. That the unfortunate thing about revision is the harder you have to work, the more useful it is, the more likely it will stay with you. That's why reading as a revision method is very limited, because you don't have to work very hard to read, and therefore it's not likely to stay in your brain. Okay, hopefully that's a useful tip. Let's crack on. Right, so let's get through. Right, now here's the tricky bit. Okay, energy transfer. Excuse me. Now let's have a look at what this diagram is showing down here. So first of all, this goes back to that learning objective about how energy is transferred, and that you have energy passed on and energy which is lost. So the first thing we have is all organisms use respiration to release energy from food. It's one of the characteristics of living things. All organisms, whether they're a producer or a consumer, uses respiration to release energy from food. Now, so respiration, as you're hopefully aware now, is a topic in this unit or this particular module, so I'm sure you're familiar with it, and it's a topic that appears in so many other topics, and that tells you that it's a fundamental topic needed at GCSE, well, and indeed A level. Okay, right. So what we find here, okay, is that the only real energy that gets passed on that we're really interested in is any energy that a organism uses for growth. So if you take down here this plant, it gets its energy from the sun, which is not a lot. It only gets about 10% of the energy from the sun that lands on it is the only energy that it uses. And then it takes some of that energy, and it has to, or some of the that energy from the sun, and it will use that energy in respiration to carry out various processes. Okay, now the one that's really of use is, or that is relevant in the context of a food chain, is any energy which is used for growth. So there are other things. I'll give you an example, something like active transport, which is a process which cells carry out to move materials from a low concentration to a high concentration. It needs energy. Now that is done an awful lot in cells, and it's done when you've got to move a substance in the direction it doesn't really want to go. It goes away from where it's at low concentration to a higher concentration, which is not really where it wants to go. Now that is not contributing to the growth of a plant. It needs energy and is necessary in order for that plant to stay alive and carry out its sort of day-to-day needs, but it doesn't actually make any new cells. Now, if you think back to the previous slide, we said that the plants use energy from the sun to make new cells, and it is the energy within those cells which is passed on when it's consumed by, well, a consumer, whatever it is that eats it. So it's surprisingly low that only 10% of the energy that has gone into the a lettuce is passed on to the rabbit, and only 10% of the energy that the rabbit consumes is actually passed on to the fox, because an awful lot of energy is wasted or is lost. Wasted is a bit unfair, is lost, and we're going to look at the ways in which that happens. So it's saying here, a large proportion of the energy that's consumed does not get used for growth. Okay, and remember, it's the stuff that's used for growth that we're interested in, because that's the stuff that gets passed on to the next stage in the food chain. Now, if you're the fox here, you couldn't care less about energy which is not passed on. You are only interested in that energy that the rabbit has consumed that you can actually obtain, which is really anything which is made into rabbit cells. As a fox, when you eat that, you can obtain that. So why is it that so much of the energy consumed does not get used for growth? Well, firstly, energy is used in movement. So whilst that rabbit is running around and using the energy that has been released in respiration for movement, that fox is not going to be able to consume to eat that lost energy. So energy used in movement for muscle contraction, the fox is not able to obtain. Energy is also used to maintain a constant body temperature. So we're talking about warm-blooded animals here, okay, which really we're talking about mammals. So those organisms use some of the energy that is released in respiration just to keep warm. And therefore, that is not consumed by the next organism in the food chain. So if you like, in terms of a food chain, it has been lost. Also, energy is lost as heat to the surroundings. So again, it's not perfectly efficient. When energy is lost as heat, though, there's no way that energy would be passed on to the next stage in the food chain. And also, there's an awful lot of food that's consumed which does not get digested, doesn't get absorbed, and therefore is lost in the organism's waste materials. So effectively, a lot of the lettuce that goes into the rabbit passes straight through the rabbit poos it out, and needless to say, the fox does not get access to the energy which is in the feces, because the fox is not eating the feces, the fox is eating the rabbit. And that's particularly relevant when you're consuming plants, because of the cellulose that is in the cell walls of the plants. That's very hard to digest. And consequently, an awful lot of feces contains a very energy-rich substance, cellulose, but that has not been digested and absorbed. Right, let's have a look. Let's see what you can remember from there. I'll give you 30 seconds to have a go at that. Okay, right, so we've got all organisms will use respiration to release energy from their food. Only energy that is used for growth is actually passed on to the next stage. And a large proportion of the energy does not get used for growth because it's used in movement, it's used in maintaining a constant body temperature. You can say keeping warm if you like, but it's not as good as saying maintaining a constant body temperature, 37 degrees C in humans. Energy is lost as heat to the surroundings, or much of the food eaten does not get digested and absorbed and is lost in the organism's waste materials. Okay, largely we're talking about feces there. Okay, let's have a look at the sort of question we might get here. So look, it says the diagram below shows the organisms in a food chain in an area. The energy present at each stage at a given time is shown in kilojoules. So you can see that the energy present in the lettuce is at 80,000 kilojoules, and then there's less energy present in all the slugs that consume the lettuces, because energy is lost, and then there's even less energy in the frogs that consume the slugs because energy is lost, and likewise with the grass snakes. Okay, so what sort of questions would we expect here? So nice, simple stuff to begin with. It says from the diagram, name a carnivore. Well, you can choose there. You can pick frogs or grass snakes. As always, remember, you can always pause this and have a go yourselves, but we'll use this as a way of just gauging the type of question that's expected. Name the producer and state its source of energy. Well, we said the producer is always the plant, and there's a lettuce there at the bottom, and the source of energy, it's got to be the sun. From the diagram, complete the table to show the energy lost in this food chain. Now, this is a lovely opportunity here. So often when maths questions come up, well, there's a mix of approaches really, or a mix of responses when a maths question comes up. But this is a very nice maths question because they're giving you, with this information here, they're telling you, they're giving you a guide as to what you need to do. So they shouldn't have to do that. You could just work out the energy lost without being given any information on lettuces and slugs and frogs to snakes. We want to know about frogs to or slugs to frogs, sorry. So the energy is lost between slugs and frogs. Well, look what they did for lettuce to slugs. So let's just say now you didn't know what to do. Okay, I don't know what that means. Okay, but just look at what we've got here. I wonder if I can just get some writing on here. So you can see that if we look at lettuce to slugs, there's lettuce with 80,000. Well, look, there's 80,000. And slugs is 12,000, and look, there's 12,000. So really what we're going to do is take the energy in the lettuce and we take away the energy that's in the slugs. Well, let's just do the same. So let's take the slugs, which is going to be this 12,000, and take away the frogs, which is 1,600. Okay, and that should make life a little bit easier. And then if you work that out, we see what we get, and that tells you we're going to put that calculation in. There's our answer. And we were helped with that because they set a precedent there by giving us a previous stage. It says during which stage is the most energy lost? So in case it's just reading which is the biggest value there. And you can see then that is that lettuce to slugs, which is really common. It's usually that first stage that the most energy is lost because there's an awful lot of that cellulose I talked about, which contains loads of energy that is not accessible to the primary consumer. And state one way in which energy is lost from the food chain and what they've got on here. So it's not digested, so it's lost in waste. Movement, they've said, we mentioned that, maintaining a constant body temperature, and actually they even allow just the broad respiration as being a way in which energy is lost, which, well, they accept it. Right, we've done food chains and food webs. Now the next step is to look at pyramids of number and pyramids of biomass. So today we're going to look at the very basic stuff of how we construct a pyramid of number, how we construct a pyramid of biomass. Now, let's see, where are we? Let's do a little recap first of all. Again, you can pause this and have a go yourselves, but I'll work through this right now so we can move on. So what is always found at the base of a food chain or food web? And that's going to be a producer or a plant. What process do all organisms use to release energy from their food is respiration. What is formed when several food chains are interlinked is food web. What happens to food that is not digested by an organism? Well, that's going to be lost as waste, come out as feces. And the name of the substance within leaves which allows plants to absorb light, that's not something we've mentioned, but it's a nice opportunity to do a bit of recall. That's chlorophyll, isn't it? Okay, right. Okay, so let's have a look at how we construct pyramids. So pyramids of number are, I would suggest, very unlikely to appear in your exam. They're uncommon to see pyramids of number. is far more likely to be looking at pyramids of biomass. And pyramids of number, oddly, I think are harder to draw. Okay, so pyramids of number, what do they show is the number of individuals at each stage in the food chain. Now, the reason they are sometimes harder to draw is because they do not all conform to this classic pyramid shape. Sometimes you can have things that do not look like a pyramid, and this happens if you've got something like a tree at the bottom of as the producer at the bottom of the food chain. Now that's not uncommon. You just have to look out for that. If you have a tree at the bottom of a food chain, and think you could have one tree and thousands upon thousands of, say, caterpillars feeding on that tree. Well, the number of trees is one. The number of caterpillars is thousands then. So this primary consumer or second stage here is going to be an awful lot bigger than the first stage, because there's just one tree and there's, what did I say, like thousands of whatever appears after that. Okay, now, but normally they do conform to this sort of very regular pyramid shape. I would say at GCSE, it's very unlikely you're going to get a question where they need a classic pyramid shape. If you are going to be asked a question, it's far more likely to be something with a little bit of an unconventional shape, and that usually means a tree at the bottom. Okay, now pyramids of biomass are far more common. Now, the lovely thing about a pyramid of biomass is they always look the same. They always look like a pyramid. Now, what does it show? It's actually recording the total amount of, well, biomass, mass of living material at each stage in the food chain. So if we go back to that situation I said about a tree, well, whilst there may only be one tree, it's huge. And consequently, if you actually looked at the mass of living material of that tree, it's going to be far greater than the mass of living material in those, the combined mass of those thousands of caterpillars. And that will always be the case with a pyramid of biomass. It will always look like this very definite pyramid shape, which makes it sound very easy. And I would say, yes, it is. But there's always going to be something that comes after that, which will be an explanation of why it always appears like that. The one possible problem area you have a pyramid of biomass is you might have to draw one to scale. But I'll show you a couple of examples of questions in a moment. Okay, let's see how we go. So what are we missing on there? Same thing as before. What numbers, what words replace those numbers? So pyramids of number record the number of individuals at each stage of the food chain. They're occasionally the wrong shape. This happens if organisms in an earlier stage are much larger than those at the next stage, and it's pyramids of biomass that record the mass of the population at each stage of the food chain. Now, let me explain why a pyramid of biomass will always look pyramid shaped. Let's take this situation here where food that is consumed, and you know what, an awful lot of food that's going to, this applies to any organism. Okay, so an awful lot of food that is eaten is actually not digested, and therefore that passes straight through your digestive system and is lost as feces. However, there is a significant proportion of the food that you eat which is digested and it's absorbed, and then you have used in respiration to release energy. And this is the central point of this particular level of understanding that we need for pyramids of biomass. Now, what's that energy going to be used for by an organism? Well, it's going to be used for movement, isn't it? You think back to that rabbit or that fox or whatever it may be, it's going to use some of the energy for movement. This is very similar to what we were talking about with energy transfer on a food chain. Some of that energy will be used for keeping warm, remember, for warm-blooded animals only or for mammals only. Now, some of that energy will be used for growth. Again, this links to what we did previously. Some of that energy is going to be used for growth, and I've put that separately. So I've got three things down the bottom here. So I've got feces, I've got keeping warm, and I've got movement. So I've got these three across here, which are ways in which energy is effectively not passed on to the next stage in the food chain. But I've got this growth, which is separate to them, because it's saying this is the thing that is passed on in the food chain. Now, there we are. those three things there, feces, keeping warm, and movement, means that is energy or used as energy use, which is not passed on to the next stage in the food chain. Now, were it not for those things, a pyramid of biomass would look like that, meaning it wouldn't look like a pyramid at all. The sides would be the same. See that the side of this second trophic level here, the primary consumer, is just as wide as the producer. But because energy is lost, actually what we get is the total biomass that's present in the consumer, the primary consumer, is significantly less than the producer, and this will always be the case, and it carries forward to the next stage in the food chain as well. So that's why you're always going to get the biomass of one level being smaller than the biomass of the previous level. It's because energy is always lost at each stage in the food chain. Now, it's that, and notice that the color there, that blue there, represents the growth. So it's this growth which can actually be passed on. So if this is the rabbit which has consumed the lettuces here, so that rabbit has lost energy here and here in not digesting it, keeping warm, a movement, but it has made some new cells and growth, and that's what's passed on to the next. When the fox eats the rabbit, this is what it can consume. Okay, this biomass here is actually what it can consume. It can't consume the lost energy here because there is no biomass there to represent it. Now, if we keep that on there, I'm just going to see if you can recall some of those. This is a topic that pupils often find very tricky, so it's worth spending a bit of time on it. So just have a look what's missing off there. Again, you can pause this, but I'll work through it now. So we got number one there, we got food which is digested, absorbed, then respiration, key term here, in cells releases energy, and then that energy can be used for keeping warm, it can be used for movement, and indeed energy is never even obtained if it passes straight through and is lost as feces. It's the growth that is actually passed on to the next stage in the food chain. Let's have a look at a question here. Let's have a look at a question. So again, you can pause, but let's work through it. It says some organisms living in a large lake and their total biomass in kilograms are shown below. They are not drawn to scale. Their total biomass, okay? It's showing their total biomass. Needless to say, it's not the biomass of an individual because a snail does not weigh 4,500 kilograms. It's all of those snails combined. It says which of the organisms present are likely to, organisms above are likely present in the least numbers. So what really it's asking is which is likely to be at the top of a food chain. And so the answer they wanted there was the pike. How should you know that? Well, because the fact that its total biomass is the smallest suggests, it tells you that it's going to be at the top of the food chain, and therefore it's likely to be present in the lowest numbers, because that is normally the case with a pyramid of number, that it normally is a pyramid shape, meaning the individual at the top of the food chain is likely to be present in the lowest numbers. And then it says draw a labeled diagram to show the pyramid of biomass containing all of these organisms. So this is what you should have. Now notice the terminology here, or notice the question here. In the space below, draw a labeled diagram. So you can't just draw, I mean, it'd be very nice and easy just to draw, you just count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to do 5 bars, getting smaller each time. Okay, that there's not much wrong with thinking it like that. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bars, because that's how many different organisms there are, and they're going to get smaller each time. It asks you to label it though. So I think I'm right in saying that it's not necessary to put the no, it just want the biomasses there to show labeled. So once you pyramid correctly drawn with correct labels and biomasses with units is 2 marks. It's asking quite a lot there. I'm confident to say pupils often miss out the labeling mark here. Okay, just and that goes back to the age-old thing of read the question and do what you're told. Okay, you can pick up so many marks just by doing that properly. Okay, and then it says the pike in the lake are affected by a parasite called a fish louse, which lives on their skin. there would be many of these parasites on each pike, but their biomass would be less than the biomass of the pike. How would you add this information to the pyramid you drew? So the answer here is to put them in a tier above the pike. So I'll go back to this. So the parasites would appear here. Now, what did it tell you? It says they're likely to be present in greater numbers. So if this was a pyramid of number, we would expect it to look like that if you were to add on those parasites, but it's not. It's a pyramid of biomass, and biomass pyramids always look pyramid shaped. Okay, so worth keeping that in mind. So they are tiered above the pike. There we are. That's what was required. And explain how a pyramid of numbers for some organisms living on land could look like the one shown below. So we're saying this is where we have a particularly large organism, such as a tree. And what does it ask there? So you got a single plant or tree named on which many organisms feed off. And it's worth mentioning, look, it's 2 marks. So, you know, you're not just going to get away with saying it's a single organism or it's a single large organism. You need to add a bit more detail than that. Okay, let's go on. Right, so let's see if we can get through decay. And that should give, if I can get through the decay, we can move on to the carbon cycle and nitrogen cycle, and some intensive farming and some bioaccumulation that's also present, an algal bloom, which is in this topic on ecosystems that we'll cover next time. So decay. Well, learning objective here is about how carbon is cycled and understand the importance of microorganisms, bacteria and fungi in decay. In order to understand that, first thing we need to do is understand the carbon cycle. Well, let's do a little recap first of all. Which ecological pyramid is always pyramid shape? Well, that's a pyramid of biomass. What is the source of energy for most communities of living organisms? It's the sun. You'll notice it says most. I mean, it's correct to say most, but for ease of understanding, it's probably be more convenient just to say all communities of living organisms. There are some communities that can use chemicals, but we can generally just say it's always the sun. What is used to show the transfer of energy between organisms? It's going to be a food chain. And then this links back to some photosynthesis stuff, which is worth keeping in mind. In what form is excess glucose stored in a plant? That's starch. And which molecules are responsible for controlling reactions in photosynthesis? That's enzymes. And some of this stuff is very relevant because we're going to see it when we come on to the carbon cycle. Right, so here we are. Here's a compost heap. This is a picture of my own compost heap, and it's divided in 2. You've got the left-hand side here. That's food that I add every day. And then the right-hand side is what the left-hand side would look like after probably about a year. And you can see what's happened there is it has, well, it's decayed, it's rotted down. And it's worth, we need to understand that principle before we can start talking about the cycling of nutrients. So let's see what we've got here. So decay, when microorganisms, so I'm talking about bacteria and fungi more than anything else, feed on dead organisms and waste materials. So that's what decay is. It's the feeding on waste materials by microorganisms. Now, why do they do that? Well, they obtain nutrients. They're feeding. That decay process is actually, we don't want to say it's how microorganisms eating, because they're not eating, but they are feeding on. And why would any organism feed on another? It's because they want to obtain nutrients, and those nutrients are then used for growth, and they're used for any other life processes that are required just for sort of day-to-day living. And one of those life processes is mentioned is respiration, and that's relevant to us because, well, no, not relevant to us, I shouldn't say that. That's particularly relevant in the context of the carbon cycle because it releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Now, worth mentioning that decay always happens faster when conditions are warm and when there's lots of oxygen. So going back to that compost heap, so that decay, that conversion from that left to that right hand side will happen far quicker in the summer when it's warmer. And also I could speed it up by turning that compost heap over now and again and therefore introducing air into the compost heap, and that would make it happen faster. And the reason for that is that the microbes that are carrying out that process are able to respire more, and that's really allowing them to thrive. And that means you got more microorganisms and working quicker. When decay is prevented, fossil fuels are formed, and carbon dioxide is released when these fossil fuels are burnt as well. So we need to keep that in mind. Now, what's missing off there? Same thing as before. What are those key words? You can pause it, but I'll move on. So decay is when microorganisms, that is bacteria and fungi, feed on dead organisms and waste materials. The microorganisms obtain nutrients from the decay process, which they use for growth and other life processes. These include the process of respiration. See, we're back, we're talking about it again, which releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And decay happens faster when conditions are warm and when the conditions contain lots of oxygen. And the reason for that is so microbes can respire. And when decay is prevented, we know that fossil fuels are formed. So this happens if you were, this might happen, for example, if there was something like a landslide and at the bottom of the landslide, so a huge landslide, bottom of the landslide, you have a load of plant or animal material. Where that would normally decay, it's not able to, okay, because there's just not enough oxygen getting in there. So those microorganisms aren't able to decay that plant and animal material, and therefore roll on a few millions of years, and that would end up becoming fossil fuels. Okay, and those fossil fuels then release carbon dioxide when they are burned. Now, I'm not going to start on the carbon cycle. Well, I'm going to show you briefly, and I'm going to show you something really useful about the carbon cycle and why I like the carbon cycle. And then we'll look at it in more detail in next time, in 2 weeks' time. But the reason I like the carbon cycle is because it pieces together lots of topics that you've covered already. So the reason that we do ecosystems at the end, it's the sixth unit or sixth part, sixth topic covered in this module, is because we're going to be talking about a lot of things that we've seen already. So here's the first one, photosynthesis. So photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and converts it into carbon compounds within the plant, glucose and starch that we've just mentioned there. So photosynthesis is a topic you've covered already, and it's linked in now. See, this is why we couldn't cover this topic right at the start of your GCSE, because there's too many other topics that link into it. And there's another one, respiration. So all organisms respire, and therefore they release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, because if you think of the equation for respiration, glucose plus oxygen releases carbon dioxide and water, and that carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere. And then we get feeding, which we just talked about, food chains. So you get animals that are able to, when they consume the plants, that carbon is passed on, okay? And then those animals respire. And so consequently, we got more respiration. We're linking that topic again, releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And then we get death. And we end up with carbon in dead organisms. And of course, what happens to the carbon in dead organisms? Well, we get decay. I mean, that's why we just talked about decay, because if we're going to make sense of the carbon cycle, we need to be referring to decay. It's worth mentioning that the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle are topics which appear in triple science only. But you'll see, so if you're only doing double science, decay, the carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle are not topics that you need to know. But you see why the decay is covered just before the carbon cycle, because we need to make reference to it now. And then those dead organisms, if they're unable to undergo decay, they'll form fossil fuels, coal and oil, and then those will be burnt or could be burnt, as we're doing a huge amount in our world, and that combustion results in carbon dioxide being released into the atmosphere. Now, we will continue with this next time, but for now we're going to pause, so we're going to stop, and we'll come back to this in 2 weeks' time. And that goes back to what we've just covered here, food webs and food chains, and we'll leave it there for this week. Bye-bye.